And it's BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Welcome to this special live stream of On Black Box Online Radio, talking to you all about DB Cooper. Yesterday on the channel, I released an episode called DB Cooper, Suspect Barb Dayton, Part 1. And I told you guys that I was going to be doing a DB Cooper episode as a follow up here on Saturday. But ultimately, there are a couple of reasons why I decided to change that from just making a normal podcast to this particular live stream here. But first, I would like to say welcome to Kid Freshie, who is here live in the chat. Kid Freshie, how's it going? You got a cheers with some Orange is the New Black coffee. Fire Pixie is also here, who says, wow, live from the start. Very nice, Fire Pixie. This is definitely one that it was thrown together rather quickly, but thank you for stopping by and checking out Black Box Online Radio. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop something down below if you have something to say about DB Cooper. And every Friday, I do a segment about DB Cooper here on Black Box Online Radio called just that, Cooper Friday. So as far as the motivation for this episode, yesterday I did the Barb Dayton episode, asking the question, was Barb Dayton DB Cooper? And I was planning a follow-up. So I had 3 news articles that I wanted to examine and discuss with you guys, because a big focus of Black Box Online Radio is looking at how does the media present these types of stories? How do writers and researchers think about these types of true crime cases that I talk about here on Black Box Online Radio, such as DB Cooper, the Zodiac Killer, and Jack the Ripper? And I recorded the whole episode, but I didn't really like the new recording because almost all of the information that was found in the news articles was identical to everything that came out in part 1. It's almost just rephrasing and rehashing, and I didn't necessarily want to do that. So I decided to make this live stream for you guys because I told you we would be talking about DB Cooper on the weekend. But also, I wanted to use this as an opportunity to go step by step through the DB Cooper process and just talk to you about the suspects, talk to you about some of the evidence, and talk to you about all of the experiences that I've had with the case. And because this is a live stream, you can put your ideas in the comment section down below about what do you think about any of the material that is discussed. On November 24th of 1971, a man boarded a plane going from Portland to Seattle. He said that he had a bomb in his briefcase, and he demanded $200,000 and 4 parachutes as a ransom. He obtained these in Seattle, and then the plane took off headed toward Reno, Nevada. But DB Cooper jumped out using the back half staircase at some point over the Pacific Northwest, and he was never seen or heard from again. Now, when I first did an episode about DB Cooper here on Black Box Online Radio, that was perhaps back in 2021 or 22. It was right around the new year. So that would have been roughly 3 years ago when I made the first episode. And once again, it was a suspect list. It was a suspect episode like this. And I was giving my initial impressions on a lot of these different suspects out there. And of course, I've had a very big connection to the suspect, Ted B. Braden, the suspect of Drew Beeson, who's the author of Paratrooper of Fortune. And I even interviewed Drew Beeson about 2 years before that, back in 2020. And, that's the first real exposures that I had to DB Cooper as a content creator. Of course, I had heard the story of DB Cooper, but Ted Braden is a different type of suspect because everybody knows that he could have done it. And, Cat Chevy is here. Hey, Cat Chevy, how's it going? Cheers with some Orange is the New Black coffee. Saying hi, Ned. Hi, everyone. Classic Chevy Cat. Classic Chevy Cat black coffee. I'm going to have to get a classic Chevy Cat cup. That'll be cool. But Ted Braden was one of the best skydivers in the world. He competed in skydiving competitions. People from the military believe that DB Cooper was Ted Braden, that these two guys are one and the same, because there's a certain finely tuned nature of Ted Braden and a certain finely tuned nature of DB Cooper, where DB Cooper really isn't bothered by a lot of things, and Ted Braden would be exactly the same in those situations, because he wouldn't be overwhelmed by committing a skyjacking because he had experienced more intense situations in his own military combat. Not to mention, as I said, one of the best skydivers in the world. He could have easily survived that jump. And I think that this is a very big misconception that people have, is just that DB Cooper had to have died. He jumped out of the plane with no helmet, no goggles, and wearing loafers. Therefore, he would have died during the jump. A lot of the mainstream media sources really try to push this narrative. But number one, shout out to Ryan Burns of the DB Cooper's Sleuth channel. It appears that DB Cooper did not jump in loafers. He jumped in a small type of boot. And number two, he may have had goggles. DB Cooper had his briefcase, right, that contained the bomb. But DB Cooper was also carrying the mystery bag. He's carrying another bag, and we don't know the contents of that one. Classic Chevy Cat says, it would be great to have you and Drew do a live stream on his suspect, maybe in the future. Yeah, I would love to do something like that, because I think the future of Black Box Online Radio is going to be just this. It's going to be a blend of the podcasts that I do in my normal format and these live streams. And in March, everybody, we will see a return of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. That orange of the new black coffee is not doing its job. But yes, there'll be a return of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. There might be a few changes to the format or something like that. But there's a reason why I do the segments like Zodiac Monday, Ripper Wednesday, and Cooper Friday in the podcast format. I really want to keep those as podcasts and then add in the additional live streams. But the honest answer is there just aren't enough days of the week. There aren't enough hours in the day, because I have an entire series on JonBenet Ramsey planned out. I would love to do that for you guys. I know exactly what I want to say and what I want to do and how I want to arrange it. It's all written up here. It's all designed up there. It's just a little bit difficult to put into action. And Fire Pixie says, where's the fox? The fox is on a tropical island right now, and I'm staying cold like everybody else in America. Can't wait to be back, though. Yes, the fox is far away. So is Snoopy. Heather Connor is here saying hello. Okay, so Ted Braden was the first suspect that I had a connection with. And it's not simply just because I talked to Drew Beeson and he told me the story of his suspect. I actually think that there's a very high chance that Ted Braden was DB Cooper. And that's something that shouldn't be downplayed, because I talk about Ted Braden a lot here on Black Box Online Radio. And some people don't like to hear about the same suspects over and over again. But wait, if you actually think that there's a high chance that this person committed the crime, that is worth exploring and that is worth investigating. And with DB Cooper suspects, there are always higher chances that people might be zoning in on the correct individual. Whereas with the Zodiac killer case, the suspects are just going in wild directions, and we are less and less certain as time goes by. But with Cooper, I think out of all the cases that I follow, that is the highest chance of being solved. Okay, so that was my experience with Ted Braden. When I did the initial suspect episode, I also learned about Richard Floyd McCoy, who again is a suspect I talk about very frequently for the opposite reason. I think that McCoy is almost like the Arthur Lee Allen of the DB Cooper world. No, I don't think McCoy was DB Cooper. He was a real skyjacker who committed his own skyjacking in 1972 with somewhat of a similar appearance, and he was arrested and broke out of prison and was ultimately killed in a shootout with law enforcement. But I just think they're just completely different types of crimes. And I also do not believe any of the findings of Dan Grider, the individual that claimed that he found DB Cooper's parachute in McCoy's possessions. I've never liked McCoy as a suspect for Cooper. I think they have completely different personalities. They committed their skyjackings in completely different ways. And I mean, I just think that he was a bumbling mess, and Cooper was cool, calm, and collected. So then I started the DB Cooper Friday segment here on Black Box Online Radio, and it took a very long time for that to happen. Back in 2023, I had been really almost just still exposed a little bit more to DB Cooper. This is 2023, about a year and a half ago. And I interviewed Jeremy Berthiaume a couple times. He has a book out called So I See You Don't Paint Houses about the Zodiac Killer. And he said that the other true crime case that he follows closely is DB Cooper. And, we sat down and we talked about his DB Cooper suspect, Kenny Christensen. And we got Ted Braden over here on one side, like, wow, this guy might be DB Cooper. Richard Floyd McCoy over here saying, no, absolutely not. I don't think this guy was DB Cooper. Kenny Christensen is, and probably always will be for me, one guy in the middle, where he is somebody who was checking a lot of the boxes but had a lot of problems. And he was a flight attendant for Northwest Orient Airlines. Prior to that, he was a mechanic. He was from the Midwest. He also was stationed in Alaska for a while. And I have my own suspect profile episode on him. I also have a direct response to the book that was written about him called Into the Blast by Skip Porteous and Robert Blevins. It's just called D.B. Cooper Into the Blast book discussion, which you can hear here on Black Box Online Radio. And so that was, again, one of the suspects that I learned about very early on. That's just really about 5 out of 10, 50% for me. But remember back in the days of school, 50% is not a passing grade. And a lot of people who closely follow the D.B. Cooper case will just tell you that they think that there is a case for Kenny Christensen, or that there just is a remarkable amount of information that people have found that does seem to match up with DB Cooper, but at the end of the day, they don't believe that Kenny Christensen was DB Cooper. Because firstly, he was a flight attendant for Northwest Orient Airlines, and he would be skyjacking his own airline, and nobody would have recognized him. And also, they could have recognized him in the days or months or years after the skyjacking. Holy crap, that was the guy from the plane. People like Tina Mucklow and Florence Schaffner and Alice Hancock, the people that are on the plane. But this is in 2023. So, we did this interview and we're talking all about DB Cooper, and it really ignited that curiosity that I have about unsolved mysteries. That's why I do this Black Box Online Radio channel, period, because I'm curious about unsolved mysteries, because I want to know more about these things and I want to talk to you guys more about them. And that's ultimately why I started BBOR, because I would read about cases online. And yes, unsolved mysteries, but also anything under the sun or in the darkness, and I just couldn't stay silent about it. And then once I began exploring the DB Cooper stuff, I was like, I want this to be a regular segment on Black Box Online Radio. But I had just launched my Wednesday show called the Jack the Ripper Report at the time. And for about 1 year, the Wednesday show on Black Box Online Radio was a revolving door of different subjects. It began with the Long Island serial killer. Well, actually, that's not quite true. It began with something called Zodiac Killer, the Linkletter Connection. And I was talking about a book that was out called Diane Linkletter, A Princess Wrongly Accused by Tom Bleecker. Orange is the New Black. And then that one turned into a 3-part series looking at the possibility of Diane Linkletter being a victim of the Zodiac Killer. She passed away when she was 20 years old in the late summer of 1969. And there are a couple reasons why people suspect her brother, Robert Linkletter, of being the Zodiac Killer. A Princess Wrongly Accused was actually written by her former fiance, Tom Bleecker. And, I looked at the Linkletter connection. I did that for 3 episodes. And then that's when the revolving door started. And I first began doing the Long Island serial killer for quite a while, actually. And then I switched to the Phantom Killer, and then to the Axeman of New Orleans. And I decided to just redo the Phantom Killer series from the beginning, the Phantom Killer from 1946. And then ultimately, Jack the Ripper came on board. And almost instantly, I went from doing the revolving door thing to recognizing that, wait a second, this stuff with Jack the Ripper, this is going to be a regular segment here on Black Box Online Radio, because there's just so much information. There's so many resources. There's so many things to discuss. And I've always said that Black Box Online Radio will never be a one-note channel. Some people are like, we only want to hear about the Zodiac. We only want to hear about DB Cooper. We only want to hear about Jack the Ripper. I've always said this channel will never be a one-note or one-subject channel, because I started it to talk about different things all at once. And I even told you I'm planning the JonBenet Ramsey series if I can find another day in the week. But one thing that did come to mind was to launch a separate Jack the Ripper channel at a certain point, because, we're talking about 136 years since Jack the Ripper committed the crime spree in Whitechapel. And the first book that was written about Jack the Ripper, or the first book that has a segment on Jack the Ripper, was also written in 1888, 136 years ago, The Curse Upon Mitre Square by J.F. Brewer, even though only the 3rd section is relevant to the murder of Jack the Ripper. But I was just like, I knew that I wanted to do something with DB Cooper. I had this thing, okay, I've got the Zodiac now. Okay, I have Jack the Ripper now. I want to do something with DB Cooper. And That ultimately led to Cooper Friday. But Fire Pixie says, no one can ever be for sure, but Drew has pretty much convinced me about Ted. Well, see, that's the thing about Ted B. Braden. He's an extremely strong DB Cooper suspect, except number one, he had green eyes, and DB Cooper was reported to have had brown eyes. Number two, he was 5 feet 9 inches tall, which or 5 feet 8 inches tall. I think they mean he was 5 feet 8 inches tall without his shoes on, so he would have been 5'9". And for the majority of the time, though, Cooper would be sitting down in a chair. Therefore, Cooper can be moving around a little bit, but people aren't going to gauge his height too well. They also might have assumed that he was taller because he had a relatively thin appearance. There's some physical descriptions of Ted Braden that don't seem to match up, and everybody wants to point out that Ted Braden had a very big nose shape that is not found in the witness sketches. I think the closest one that resembles Ted Braden, obviously, is Composite C that was made in the late 1980s, and it was from the memory of Florence Schaffner, the one flight attendant that saw DB Cooper without the sunglasses. But I just remembered something. I have a DB Cooper challenge question for you guys here in the chat. And to anybody who's listening to this later on, and even if you're listening to this on the podcast version that comes out on Spotify and Apple Podcasts called Black Box True Crime, I want to know what you think. Did Tina Mucklow see DB Cooper without his sunglasses on? Because this has come up in a few discussions lately. Now, the reports that I've heard and the discussions and stories that I've heard is just that everybody says that only Florence Schaffner saw DB Cooper without his sunglasses on. And the reason why I wanted to talk to you guys about this is I wear sunglasses occasionally. As you guys know, I spend a lot of the time in the Philippines. I spend a large portion of each year in the Philippines now. And when I go to the beach, I wear sunglasses, but I don't keep them on for 5 hours. Now, there are two main reasons why DB Cooper wore the sunglasses. Number one, it's a Clark Kent style disguise. Disguise, that's one. Number two, a lot of people believe that DB Cooper had some type of military training and that he was trying to adjust his eyes for the night. So when he was going to jump out of the plane at night, it would have been after dark easily in November at 8 p.m., 8:15 p.m., that it would be much easier for him to see while he was doing the jump as opposed to just going from the lights on the plane to the darkness of the sky. So number one is the disguise, and number two is practicality during the jump. But I'm just saying this, I don't keep my sunglasses on for 5 hours. And all this time that Tina Mucklow was spending with him, she never saw him without his sunglasses. I would expect that he would have taken them off. But I'd love to know what you guys think. Tim Star 5150 is here, and he says, Braden was Cooper. I'd bet my house on it with all the info I've got. All right, well, it seems like everybody in the chat is going for a suspect named Ted B. Braden. And I've only gone through 3 DB Cooper suspects. This was going to be a suspect list, suspect medley episode. But, I mean, it sounds like everybody's just saying it's Ted Braden. Case closed. Mike Cook says, Dan Grider is interested in promoting Dan Grider. Yes. Yes. Concluding his videos, by the way, if you would like my PayPal, here it is. I also have Venmo. I also have Cash App. You can also send me bundles of bills buried at Tina Bar, and I will go collect them myself. Pretty blatant about that. I haven't even been talking to you guys about buymeacoffee.com lately because I've just been focused on the channel. I often forget. Six Man Films is here saying Christensen would have been identified instantly by the crew. That's a big strike against Kenny Christensen. And also that a lot of the reasons why they suspect Kenny Christensen aren't the best, that he just had this secret that he wanted to tell his family, but he wasn't able to do so. Well, that doesn't mean that he was DB Cooper. A lot of people think that Kenny was just trying to say that he was gay, but that doesn't mean that either. If I tell you in the chat right now, I have a secret I want to tell you, but I can't. Does that mean that I skyjacked a plane? No. Maybe it just means that I stole your golf clubs one Christmas 5 years ago. Well, something realistic for you guys in the chat. It might just be like, okay, I actually do have the Fox mug, and it's in the cabinet back there. No, I don't. That's a lie. The Fox mug is in a very safe place in a very safe cabinet somewhere in the southern Philippines. But it's just that's an example. Just because you say you have a secret doesn't mean you can jump to conclusion perfectly. Voodoo Baby is here saying, Buenas tardes, Ned. Esto también, Voodoo Baby. Mike Cook says, Ned, of all the murders you mentioned, have multiple perpetrators. Mike Cook, do you say that? Are you asking that as a question, or are you stating that as a fact? Out of all the murder stories that I talk about on Black Box Online Radio, the answer is multiple perpetrators. You mean the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, and JonBenet Ramsey? Out of all the cases that I cover with multiple perpetrators, I think the biggest chance is D.B. Cooper. I don't mean that there were two people on the plane or anything like that, or that there's one Cooper in the bathroom and there's one Cooper in the seat. No, absolutely not. But that Cooper had some type of outside help. All right, though. I will come back to that. Hey, Scott Bobbitt is here. Yo, hey, how's it going, Scott Bobbitt? Melissa Rose is here saying, hey, Ned, Happy New Year. I thought Sheridan Peterson was viable until the DNA came back from his daughter, ruling him out. They just aired that documentary again last night. Melissa, as you brought up Sheridan Peterson, this is a very good time to just kind of do a basic walkthrough through Cooper Friday. My experience with these unsolved mysteries has been very similar for all of them. Number one, I learned some basic information about the case. Number two, I go through the suspect profiles. Number three, I start going through articles that are about them, just articles on any aspect of the case and different theories that people have. Then you get to the books. Then you just want to just like, okay, I've looked at all of this pop culture stuff about this high profile unsolved mystery. Now I want to digest some things about just what do the authorities have to say? What's in the case file? What does the FBI or Scotland Yard have to say about this case? So early on, I looked at the suspect profiles. And of course, you're going to encounter Sheridan Peterson relatively soon. Sheridan Peterson was a skydiver. He was a smoke jumper who did skydiving for firefighting, more or less. And he was the suspect of Ericulus. Nice name. And the Ericulus is, of course, one of the loudest voices in the D.B. Cooper world. And he was someone who was widely discussed. But some of the other strikes against Sheridan Peterson is, number one, he was trying to provide an alibi, saying that he was not in the country at the time. He was living outside of the country in Nepal on November 24th of 1971. Number two, he had extremely bright blue eyes. And even though I'm not completely sold on the eye color, I mean, what Brian Burns is trying to say when he says that even though maybe someone might mistake brown for hazel or brown for green, bright blue and brown don't often get confused in that way. Now, about the DNA, just like the Zodiac case, I'm not convinced that they have Cooper's DNA. I'm not convinced that that DNA sample is 100% accurate and 100% viable. And I see a lot of strikes against Sheridan Peterson being D.B. Cooper, but this is a flimsy piece of evidence. I do think to this day that he has one of the strongest resemblances to Composite A, the most famous composite sketch of D.B. Cooper with the pointed chin and the enormous forehead. If we're going to talk about enormous foreheads, why don't we bring up another D.B. Cooper suspect right now? Barb Dayton. I was about to say the man of the hour. I was like, oh my goodness. I'm so glad I didn't say that. Barb Dayton, the born man of the hour, one of the more outrageous D.B. Cooper suspects. And as I said at the beginning, I was going to do an entire episode for you today on Barb Dayton. It was going to be called D.B. Cooper, Suspect Barb Dayton, Part 2, because I wanted to go through some more articles about Barb Dayton. And Barb Dayton was the subject of yesterday's Cooper Friday episode. And a lot of you people in the comments had the same response. You're like, wow, what an outrageous story. Number two, I don't think she was D.B. Cooper. Yes, that a woman underwent gender reassignment surgery in 1969. Barb Dayton was the first case of gender reassignment surgery. I got to drink some. That hits the spot. Barb Dayton was the first person to undergo gender reassignment surgery in the state of Washington. This was in 1969. And that her plan was to get revenge on society because, number one, Barb Dayton was unable to become a commercial aviation pilot. Number two, she felt she never fit into society. And also, like, she didn't feel that she belonged as a man named Bobby Dayton. She felt that she didn't belong as a woman. It was just a big FU to the system and everything. And there are pieces of evidence for this. Number one, Barb Dayton reportedly confessed to multiple people providing information that was not publicly revealed. And these people are known as the Foremans, Pat and Tammy Foreman. And Tammy Foreman even has a very extensive YouTube video on Barb Dayton as a DB Cooper suspect, which I invite everyone to watch. And with Barb Dayton, I thought I was going to go into this. Well, firstly, I thought I was going to go into this thinking that she had the gender reassignment surgery after being Cooper. And I'm like, no, it's before, 2 years before. Once I learned that, I was like, this is going to be absolutely not a 0 out of 10 suspect, no chance at all. But actually, there were some interesting points that were considered, and Barb Dayton reportedly even gave a detailed confession on how she committed the skyjacking. Everything's all just laid out there step by step. She landed near a hazelnut orchard in Washington. She buried the money in a cistern, as well as the parachute and the suit that was worn by DB Cooper. And in the mystery bag, what that actually contained was a wig and feminine clothing. And then she just can try and revert back into her female persona, Barbara, as opposed to Bobby. And I think that there are some strong points. Not a 0 out of 10. But also, not even an average suspect, just slightly below average in terms of the creation of a suspect profile. If you were to take that episode that I created for you, that I'm not going to air because it's too repetitive from part one, the only real thing that I could share as a new form of contribution to the discussion is that Barb Dayton is a slightly below average suspect. I mean, just over a 4 and less than a 5. Heather Connor says Barb. Yes, Barb, short for Barbara. And she was born Robert Dayton. She went by the name Bobby and then adopted Barbara. Okay, so a lot of things are going on in the chat here. And Six Man Film says, I don't think anyone has named who Cooper was, but I bet his name is somewhere in the FBI files. Absolutely. Now, we started off this episode talking about Ted B. Braden. A lot of people are just going to say, yep, Ted Braden, case closed. Absolutely, names are going to be in the files. Six Man Films says, Jack the Ripper had multiple killers. I would bet money on it. Entirely possible. There are reasons to suspect multiple killers in Jack the Ripper, I think, more so than the Zodiac killer. A lot of the evidence in the Zodiac case is pushing toward one perpetrator, but you guys know that I'm open to the possibility of the Zodiac having multiple killers. I talked about it for years. I evaluated the evidence, maybe minute by minute, more than anybody else on YouTube. And by the way, there are now 2,000 episodes of Black Box Online Radio. I just saw that. Feel free to check something out. Kid Freshy says, challenge question for you, Ned. Zodiac Killer, Cooper, and Jack the Ripper enter the Thunderdome. Who emerges? Oh, Kid Freshy. Unless, let's say for a second that Cooper is not Ted Braden, CIA mercenary killer. Let's say, hypothetically, is not Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper. You see what the Zodiac killer is going to do is he's going to be like walking up, I'm a big, bad, tough man. Look at my 22 caliber firearm. And Jack the Ripper would slit his throat in a heartbeat, and then he would cut out his heart while it's still beating and shove it in his face. Jack the Ripper would eviscerate the Zodiac killer, and Jack the Ripper would also eviscerate DB Cooper too, because Cooper would also just be trying to play it cool, and Jack the Ripper had stealth. The Zodiac wasn't a very stealthy individual. I mean, Jack the Ripper can sneak around in the shadows undetected. Absolutely, Jack the Ripper would emerge from the Thunderdome. That's what I'm going with. Cat Chevy says, do you guys mean copycats or different murderers and motives? For example, the Lake Herman Road murders had a different perpetrator for different reasons. Well, like if you just want to talk about different reasons for the crimes in the Zodiac case, sure. I would love to have some discussions on that. Classic Chevy Cat, I think they met meant that there were actually different killers in the Zodiac and Jack the Ripper cases. Now, with DB Cooper, that's mostly going to be like having an accomplice who's going to be the ride, dropping him off at the airport, picking him up at some unknown location, giving him some type of access to some place to stay for the night. With the Barb Dayton theory, it's actually that she jumped, successfully landed, buried the stuff, changed her disguise, took a very long walk out of the woods, and she was able to get home in time for the evening news. Which, I mean, you probably would need at least 3 hours. The 11 o'clock news, going from like 8:15 to 11 o'clock. And Melissa says, Barb, I got to catch yesterday's episode. Yes, you can find it on YouTube under the name DB Cooper, Suspect, Barb Dayton. Six Man Film says that is the nicest way to say it. Sure. Mike Cook says, what I mean is that those murders were unrelated. Oh, yes, you can put that. It's a defendable theory in Jack the Ripper hoax theory. We also have the Zodiac hoax theory. That is something that really pulled me into the Zodiac world, the Zodiac hoax theory. And I still have those old podcast episodes up there. This is a big difference between Black Box Online Radio and a lot of other YouTube channels. Some people will make an episode, realize that it's crap, and take it down. I've only done that like 5 times. Most of my older crappy episodes, my old Black Box recordings, are all still up here. That's why there are 2,000 episodes of Black Box Online Radio. But a lot of people really connected with the book discussion that I did on the Great Zodiac Killer Hoax of 1986. Started in 2019, mind you. 2025. It's amazing how time flies. Melissa Rose says, I once referred to my Aunt Barb as Uncle Bob by mistake. I have both. The names are so close, an honest mistake. And that's probably exactly what Barb Dayton was thinking when she chose to adopt that as her identity. And Mike Cook says, motive is everything, Ned. Very few murders are committed spontaneously. I agree. And again, I don't use the word spontaneous when I'm talking about committing murders or crimes. I mean, something like D.B. Cooper. Do you think that was spontaneous? Let's use other terms. Spur of the moment, instantaneous, impulsive. No, not with Cooper. Cooper was planned. The Cooper skyjacking was planned. He knew what he was doing. He put a lot of meticulous planning into it. I really believe this in all of my fiber and heart and soul. I don't think that D.B. Cooper just kind of was like, oh, tomorrow I'm going to skyjack a plane. Where do I find the dynamite? No, I don't think he did it like that. I think this was all meticulously planned. At least 7 days of meticulous planning went into this. So says me. Now, as far as impulsive, unplanned, and spur of the moment murderers, those are just really what we call them, the impulsive serial killers, the ones that do get the urge to murder in that exact moment, or they use it as a way to deal with frustrations. And I've talked about these examples so many times on the channel. Kenneth Harrison, the Boston Giggler, who was literally just all of a sudden, he would just have the instant moment, I'm going to murder this person. You know, it just hits him like a light bulb, or just it's a flash that just happens where he recognizes that someone is in a vulnerable place. So he murdered the person, and he murdered at least 4 people. Gary Gene Grant was a serial killer from Seattle, who's sometimes called Seattle's unknown serial killer. And, you know, he would just be like having a bad day or something, and he just sees someone in a vulnerable place, so he would stab them. Yes, those are very impulsive crimes because he's not going out with the intention to murder, just like walking down a trail. Oh, I'm pissed off. Hey, there's somebody there. I'm going to stab them. And with Gary Gene Grant's first murder, he just stabbed the person one time, and he just hit the person in a very, very vulnerable spot. Eric L says, Got Ned live. What up, people? Hey, Eric, you got a cheers with some Orange is the New Black coffee. Darkside is here saying, how's it going? Eric L says, always will remember the Cooper segment on Unsolved Mysteries. It was good. Now, are you talking about the one from the 1980s that gave us Composite C, Eric? Because Composite C is the one that looks so different than all of the other Cooper composite sketches. And Composite C is the one that has the hairline that comes really down almost to the eyebrows, and the long, narrow face, and the bigger nose, the one that resembles Ted Braden the most. Composite A is called the Bing sketch, which is named for Bing Crosby, and it has the very pointed jawline, the extremely narrow nose, and also the big forehead. Now, Composite B is called the Cary Grant sketch, and it has kind of the more, let's say the flatter facial features, if you will. But we've been through some of the DB Cooper suspects in this episode. Ted Braden, we've talked about Barb Dayton, Kenny Christensen, Richard McCoy, and Sheridan Peterson. Now, as far as my explorations into DB Cooper and Cooper Friday, I think I was persuaded somewhat by Darren Schaefer, as well as you guys in the audience, to look more at E. Howard Hunt as a DB Cooper suspect. Because I used to release shorts and reels here on Black Box Online Radio, and I'm going to get back to that in the future. But I used to put out a short every day, and I did 2 shorts on DB Cooper. One was on E. Howard Hunt, and one was on John Emil List. I was literally just looking at the DB Cooper suspect list, and I'm thinking, what on earth are these people doing here? E. Howard Hunt, who worked for the Nixon administration, the Watergate conspirator. Why on earth is he? Is this just like people who are like making up these wild stories so they have to just turn everything into a giant conspiracy? So I made one short about him. And then ultimately I talked about him, a little bit on the channel, and I got some feedback, as well as following the show The Cooper Vortex, hosted by Darren Schaefer. And they were like, wait a second. There are reasons why people think that E. Howard Hunt could have been DB Cooper. People are not doing this in a baseless way. And number one, extremely strong resemblance to some of the physical descriptions. Number two, he had the abilities. He had also trained to jump in a suit before. And number three, Nixon was also doing some things about aviation during his administration, and there's a motive about how it could all be tied together. And E. Howard Hunt is the subject of the book DB Cooper Examined, Identified, and Exposed by Nat LaFouque. Did I get that right? All right, so I was just very curious about him. And I have a suspect profile episode about him called DB Cooper Suspect E. Howard Hunt. And I also have an episode about him called My Life with a CIA Spy, if you just want to hear more about E. Howard Hunt in a different context. And, he's one that, I was just extremely curious about. Now I'm like, the wool is off my eyes a little bit. Maybe he's a little bit more ridiculous. Now, there is one suspect that I've done a live stream about. Not a podcast, not in my suspect playlist, but I did a live stream once on John Emil List. I did the short episode on John Emil List. Again, I'm like, what is this? This ridiculous conspiracy theory again? What is this? Some type of ridiculous true crime theory again about John Emil List? He was a family annihilator who killed his family, went on the run, and if I recall from my episode, he drove his car to the airport, but he didn't get on a plane. He then got on a train and went out to the Midwest, and he actually ended up working as a cook in a restaurant in Colorado. But he's one of the most famous people that was just mentioned on America's Most Wanted and Forensic Files. There's a big true crime story there, but absolutely not DB Cooper. Absolutely not. That's my ultimate take on the subject. I went in there with no hope, and I came out there of it with no hope. Whereas, with E. Howard Hunt, there's actually a little bit of hope there. But you will see John Emil List's name mentioned on lots of different DB Cooper suspect threads. Rob Beansman is saying, thanks, Darkside. Hope you're having... Oh, yes, that's for Darkside. So you guys are being very fast in the chat today. Rosie Ruiz says, Ned is drunk again. I thought his previous apology was so sincere. Gotta skip this one, unfortunately. Do better. Sorry, Rosie. Today is just orange is the new black coffee. But as you can see, Rosie is crying. So everybody in the chat, I made Rosie cry. This episode did not succeed. Oh no. For some reason, I don't seem too bothered by that. I should Just black coffee today, Rosie. You guys can't see that though. Cat Chevy. Oh, Darkside says, "Oh, Happy New Year to you, Rob." Cat Chevy says, "I don't know. I picture the Zodiac as a planner, a troller, but a planner on dates, times, etc. OCD possibly." Well, Cat Chevy, one person who would agree with you completely is Sam Fisher, who's the author of the book The Zodiac Killer Identity, and he believes that the Zodiac Killer not only had OCD, he had a form of OCD called arithmomania, and that I'm just kind of laughing though again thinking about Rosie Ruiz's comment there. Arithmomania is like a type of OCD that is relevant to certain types of numbers. And Rob Beansman says, "Hope you're having a good weekend too." Dark Side. Now I'm in the loop. Okay. Fire Pixie says, "Oh, you guys are having some chats there, so I'm going to jump ahead to some stuff about the DB Cooper suspects." Six Man Film says, "Hunt is basically the most interesting man on earth type of guy. Rich guy, oil, successful, author, political ties everywhere, JFK conspiracy ties, Watergate ties, and much more." All right, Six Man Films. Now, wouldn't that be something if if he actually turned out to be DB Cooper? I mean, there would be a very big reason why they would cover that up and bury the secret and bury the evidence. That's why, though, if you're going to talk about the progression of things here on Cooper Friday, I really looked at that. And for a long time, like if you had asked me this back in July or August, who are your top two DB Cooper suspects? I might have said E. Howard Hunt and Ted Braden. It made so much sense to me. Got my dates wrong. June and July. Ted B. Braden and E. Howard Hunt, because those are the types of people that would have gotten away with this. They caught the other skyjackers, they caught the other copycats. The reason why DB Cooper is so famous is because he's the one who escaped. He's the one who got away with it. That's why there's such a big mystery. And there wouldn't be so much a mystery if you're just like, yeah, Ted Braden was caught and they just buried it. They did other stuff like that. He received an honorable discharge in exchange for not revealing certain pieces of information. E. Howard Hunt was a literal spy, and he might have even been instructed to do this by Nixon. And as you said, as you heard me say earlier, I called out conspiracy theorists. Guys, I'm a conspiracy theorist when I think there is one. Sometimes I think people are pushing conspiracy theories that are completely incorrect, but not in that case. With Ted B. Braden, it's very defendable. Mike Cook says Howard Hunt was an interesting character, but he wasn't DB Cooper. Clown show. Perhaps. I've definitely taken a step down. I've definitely come down from that cloud for a second when I don't completely accept that E. Howard Hunt was one of my top two suspects, but always, always. What we can do with these true crime cases is you can have a suspect that you can just put on the shelf. Oh, I can actually do it over here. You can just put on the shelf right there, and you can just leave them there for a later date. They can be waiting in the wings, and you can always reach back and just pull one out. That was not planned. Well, that's really cool. And you can actually see that book there, The Skyjacker. That is one that I'm going to be working into new episodes of Black Box Online Radio. I don't know if you guys can read that. That's what the blue book is. But most of those things are true crime books for the future of Black Box Online Radio. So we got some more things in the chat here. Cheryl says, "Can you email Jerome? He can give you my email. I need to talk to you out of chat." I don't see why not. Anything you wanted to talk about, Cheryl? I know you're like a forensics person. And Six Man Film says, E. Howard Hunt's motive would have been just for the hell of it, and he would have said, then why ask? And then he would have said that when asked, I have a grudge. That is something, though, that does match up, because when DB Cooper's sitting on the plane, right, and they just say, like, you have a grudge against their airline? No, I just have a grudge. Well, with E. Howard Hunt, if it is that scenario that I laid out, that it's even involving some type of issue with the Nixon administration, or like E. Howard Hunt goes rogue and does it himself, why would he say that I just have a grudge if he's doing it for the hell of it, just because he's a spy and he knows he can pull this off, or if he's actually dealing with some type of FAA regulations and Nixon orchestrated this for his own ridiculousness, tricky dick. Why would he say I have a grudge? I completely agree that those would be strikes against E. Howard Hunt as a DB Cooper suspect. Cheryl says, I just want to talk to you about something you were asking about. You mean me, right? Or are you talking to somebody in the chat? Well, absolutely. And Cheryl, you can always get me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. I mean, that's where anybody can email the show. That was for Fire Pixie. Fire Pixie, you stole the show once again. Fire Pixie's been a very big star of Black Box Online Radio over the last 6 months, particularly on the live streams. And anybody can go back and watch some of the older True Crime Talk Radio in the morning episodes. Fire Pixie says he's drunk, remember? Not today. Just orange is the new black coffee from now on. But to go onward with the DB Cooper suspect list. So when I launched the Cooper Friday segment, the first suspect profile that I did was on Joe LaCasse. And this was one that was requested by one of you guys. I think it was Jay Weiss in the chat who requested an episode about Joe LaCasse as a DB Cooper suspect. And he was one who really stood out to me. And Joe LaCasse is the suspect of Bill Rollins. And skyjackings happened a lot more frequently in the 60s and 70s than they do today. Because, what was it, 50 some days before the Cooper skyjacking, Joe LaCasse's daughter, Susan LaCasse, was murdered in a skyjacking. And that skyjacking has since been known as 58 November. And even if you just read about Joe LaCasse on the suspect profiles, you're going to see that Joe LaCasse is someone who is listed as having a crystal clear motive. Revenge. It's not even about the money. And then he jumps and he doesn't even care about the money so much. It's just about getting revenge on the FBI because his daughter was murdered and they really couldn't do a whole lot about it. Fire Pixie says, I'm kidding. I know, Fire Pixie. I know. Cheryl says, I would love to talk to you too, Ned. Well, Cheryl, it's not very sincere now, is it? Yes, you can send the courtesy email if you want to blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. Yeah, you can send me a pity email if you want. I'll try to get back to you. But now that I know that your feelings are going somewhere else, not necessary. Dark Side of the Moon says, Ned, make a Discord, please. I know very little about Discord. You guys know that I'm not really a technology person. I have to learn, how do I push the button? Which is so weird because I can learn some things really fast and other things I can't. I've never been diagnosed with ADHD, but that is something that I read about it when I'm exploring stories of ADHD. And, as far as, let's just getting back to Joe LaCasse real fast. Lots of strong points. Again, lots of points for bizarre consideration. And I thought about making the suspect rating episode for DB Cooper where I give everybody a percentage or a points out of 10 for the creation of their suspect. And remember, 10 out of 10 is completely. And maybe I'll do that in the near future because I think that we could see very clearly how, for me personally, somebody like Kenny Christensen is a mid-level suspect. Somebody like Joe LaCasse is also a mid-level suspect. But Joe LaCasse, that was this hand, right? Joe LaCasse is just a little bit above Kenny Christensen in my book. So I would just lay it all out just like that. And the week after I did the Joe LaCasse episode, I did an episode on a very famous DB Cooper suspect whom I haven't mentioned in this episode yet. And his name is Walter Reca. Walter Reca is much like Barb Dayton in the sense that he confessed to being DB Cooper. Number two, he also went on the record, made recordings confessing to being DB Cooper and how he planned the skyjacking. The joys of going live. But as far as that, absolutely not. I mean, I think that a big problem with the Reca theory is that Walter Reca was identified by someone in Cle-Elum, Washington on November 24th, 1971. So he is kind of like wandering the woods and so on with a raincoat that's draped over his arm. But when they fabricated the story, let's just say when he participated in this fake story about being DB Cooper, They probably weren't aware of how far Cleolum was from the Victor 23 flight path and the drop zones, which ultimately leads me to think that this was all just something that was made up. I do not believe the Walter Reca story at all. And here's something that I will genuinely share with you. I am perplexed. Why do so many people think that Walter Reca was DB Cooper? Why are all these books coming out? Why are all these people just like getting on the internet saying, yeah, Walter Reca was DB Cooper? He doesn't match the physical descriptions. He's 100 miles east of the expected flight path. He is also somebody who had a known history of telling wild stories about being an international spy for the KGB and so on. Barb Dayton is a very similar character, telling a bunch of other wild stories that I discussed in my episode. So, all right, some people make up a bunch of crap. Well, actually, I don't know if all of Barb Dayton's stories are crap. I think that Walter Reca's stories were most likely crap. Some people just make stuff up because they're bored. Oh, we've solved a mystery of life. Yeah, but that's ultimately where I would put Walter Reca. And if we're going to talk about confessions, there is a DB Cooper suspect whom I haven't mentioned yet in this episode that I do think is actually very worthy of consideration. And he might have actually been DB Cooper. And his name is Wolfgang Gossett. And when I was doing my DB Cooper suspect profiles, as I said, I started with Joe Lakich and I went to Walter Reca. And it wasn't until several weeks later that I did one on Wolfgang Gossett. He made multiple confessions. He even had a lawyer involved, and he claims he buried some of the evidence. But there actually are some strong reasons to consider him. He does have a very strong resemblance to the physical descriptions. Fire Pixie says, I don't see the CIA caring that much about safety rules. Oh yeah, that'd be maybe that was too much of a stretch in my point. Where even Nixon caring too much about like any type of thing where he would orchestrate something like the DB Cooper skyjacking. Maybe yes, maybe no. Sometimes people can be unpredictable, but the CIA. I mean, I guess in the theories that I entertain more about like somebody like Ted Braden, I don't think Ted Braden would have been an active CIA operative committing the DB Cooper skyjacking. I think if he did it, it would have been rogue. I think absolutely rogue. E. Howard Hunt, I was really 50-50 on. Oh, Fire Pixie says, unless it was to get more control of the airlines. Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's what you would get like the nutshell version of E. Howard Hunt. It's just that Richard Nixon wanted to get more control over the airlines and implement new measures and so on. So he sends his Watergate plumber to commit the skyjacking because they knew he could get away with it. E. Howard Hunt, though, was a very public figure, testifying before Congress, in sunglasses, mind you. E. Howard Hunt has been mentioned on the news multiple times, and nobody is going to recognize him, be like, oh my goodness, that was DB Cooper. Big strike against him. And Mr. JSV is here saying, I'm way late. Hey, this was a surprise live stream because I told you guys I would be talking about DB Cooper for this Saturday episode, but this one will be winding down now. And as I said at the beginning, I was originally planning on doing a part 2 to the Barb Dayton episode, but ultimately this turned into just an open free-for-all DB Cooper suspect live stream. But I do appreciate everything that you guys threw in about the Zodiac Killer and Jack the Ripper and the CIA and other stories. And Mr. JSV says, Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you too, Mr. JSV. You got such cheers with some oranges, the new black coffee. Rosie already left the live stream because she thought I was drunk again, but no, just coffee today. And this episode is going to be winding down, but there will be a new episode about DB Cooper coming out next Friday here on Black Box Online Radio. And of course, there's going to be a Zodiac Killer news report coming out on Monday. By the way, guys, I interact with a lot of people with talking about the Zodiac Killer. I also just read and explore Zodiac Killer content on my own because I did that for years. I had a completely different Zodiac Monday planned for you, but I started, getting some messages, getting some emails, as well as just finding things because of the internet, social media, and my own curiosities. Completely different Zodiac Killer news report is coming out. And I was actually going to pick up with some of the more criminological analyses that I was doing from last Wednesday's show about Jack the Ripper and expand upon that in the Zodiac Killer world. And I could do that at a certain point. It's just all of these things have been presented to me. So it's going to turn into another Zodiac Killer news report for Zodiac Monday. And there will be a Wednesday episode about Jack the Ripper. And of course, Friday talking about D.B. Cooper. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. One more time, you can hit the like button if you want and subscribe if you haven't. But you can also contact me at blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. I am your host, Blackbox Ned. Please feel free to visit the Facebook page for Black Box Online Radio. I just realized this was the first live stream of the new year. Happy New Year to everyone. I hope you have an amazing new year, and thanks for supporting this channel. Darkside says take care. You take care too. Cheryl says thanks. You're welcome, Cheryl. Everybody have a wonderful weekend. Until next time.